Welcome to the Research Culture Uncovered podcast, where in every episode we explore what is research culture and what should it be. You'll hear thoughts and opinions from a range of contributors to help you change research culture into what you want it to be.
Welcome to the latest episode of the Research Culture Uncovered podcast. My name's Ged Hall and I'm Head of Research and Development at the University of Leeds, where I've been specialising in research impacts since 2011. So that's mostly what I do on the podcast. So there's a link in the show notes for all the episodes around research impact. And then over the last year, I've actually been doing some kind of special infrequent episodes where I've been interviewing my research impact heroes. So I've already done a couple of those, and the link to that playlist is in the show notes too. The first of which was Mark Reeds, the second was Julie Bailey, both a load of fun for me to catch up with them. And the third I'm really looking forward to because I've been a big fan of Dr Tamika Heiden from the Research Impact Academy in Australia for longer than I can remember, to be honest. I think it's, if I think back, I think it was the first Research Impact Summit that I attended where I thought, this lady knows her stuff. And so I'm really looking forward to learning from her today. And hopefully you all out there will hear a lot from her. Tamika, thanks for saying you'd be interviewed, and welcome to the podcast.
Well, thanks for having me, Jed. And it's nice to be someone's impact hero. So thank you for that. That's very sweet. It's been a while since that first summit, but I'm glad I started it then.
Absolutely, yeah, and I think the whole community was really glad you started it because that was in the kind of nascent days of research impact. I think was the first one in 2014, was it?
It was 2016.
2016. So we had our first research excellence framework, and we're trying to recover from it, I guess. I think once you've gone through a trauma, the maybe the first Impact Summit was part of that therapy session for us all in the UK.
Perhaps. And I love that you call it a trauma.
Yeah, well, to be honest, it doesn't hit me hard because I am a bit of an impact nerd, so I quite enjoy it, to be honest.
Yeah, I love meeting a good impact nerd, and there's plenty of us around. So I think we can all safely say that we enjoy the trauma.
Absolutely, we enjoy the messiness that is involved in all of that and the systems that we have to interact with. So, Tamika, one thing I always ask Mark and Julie when I interviewed them is what was their journey? What makes you so passionate about research impact? Why is your business all about it? And kind of, where's your career gone? And I know recently you were interviewed on Sarah McCluskey, so you don't need to kind of do the, I was this and I was that. But, and I'll put a link to that episode on Sarah's podcast in the show notes too. But, what's the kind of values reason for why research impact and why you do it now?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And look, I think for me, it really does stem back to the original reason that I got into research. And the reason I did a PhD, I didn't grow up thinking I was going to be an academic, and I didn't grow up thinking I'd go to university. But when I kind of came across the opportunity to do a PhD and realized it was a possibility, for the first thought was, this can't be true, the imposter syndrome creeps in. But secondly, I think it was, wow, I have an opportunity to make a difference. I have an opportunity to do something that could change the world. And that was my whole philosophy. And that's been my value. I'm a helper. I can't help myself. I'm a helper. I always want to give advice and help people, even when they don't want it. But, people always say, if you want something to get shared broadly, just tell Tamika, because if it's great, she'll tell everyone. But what I realized pretty quickly in doing that is that I wasn't making that difference through the research I was doing. And it sort of sat with me. Who's going to do this? Who makes sure that my work gets to where it's needed? The university must do that. Somebody must be out there doing that, or magic must happen. And it was only through chance that I ended up getting a position where it was on a grant that talked all about knowledge translation. And at that time, the people didn't really know what knowledge translation was. And so I started Googling, and that's when I found people like David Phipps and Melanie Barwick and people in Canada and reached out to them and had great conversations. And basically, I fell into this because I went and trained in knowledge translation and later in impact and found my people and realized that through knowledge translation, research impact, I could change the world. And importantly, do what I really love doing, help other people change the world. And so that was kind of how it sort of happened. And the reason why I love this work is because ultimately I like making a difference. I like seeing benefit happen. And the best part is I'm not that much removed from research. So with my researcher kind of background, I feel like I still get to be in that world, but do what I'm really passionate about, and that is making that difference. So for me, I guess that's my values that drive me to do that, and that's why I decided to do it. I really did try to do it within an institute and to try and do it internally in a job I had already, and that was okay for a while. But ultimately, in Australia, we didn't have the context for that to happen internally, and I felt like I was being limited in my thinking, and I come from a background of entrepreneurs. So ultimately, I thought, you know what, I'm just going to try and help more people, help as many people as possible, and just took a leap. And that was creepy and scary. And yeah, I don't know. I spent the first couple of years wondering why on earth I'd done this, to leave a nice, cozy position to do this. Um, but again, I think it was that passion to do that. And everyone I spoke to said, you just light up when you talk about this.
Yeah, that's really interesting because your face has been, we don't release the podcast unfortunately via video, but watching you tell me that story, yeah, your face has been lighting up in terms of that. And I'm just a quick follow up on that. I interviewed Vicky Ward as well, and she was mentioning how when she started moving into the kind of knowledge mobilization space, she kind of all her attention kind of went to Canada because that seems to be where the real magic has happened. So tell us a bit more about that experience.
Yeah, so that was an interesting one. And to this day, I still find that really quite interesting. The fact that when I put the words into Google knowledge translation, that it was popping up people from Canada. So ultimately, it was like, okay, this is something that happens in Canada, and I read a bit more into that, and I think that was, it was probably 2010-ish, 2012-ish, yeah, 2012, I think, around that stage when I went to Canada and trained. And at that time, they had been talking about and doing knowledge translation, knowledge mobilization activities for 12 years since 2000. And I was kind of fascinated that no one is really talking about that in many other places. And what's perhaps really interesting about that is that they started this way of thinking. I know it's been in other ways, there's lots of other terminology and it tends to go in cycles, but they really positioned how can we embed opportunity for impact? Because that's what translation and mobilization is. It's how do we create the opportunities for it and get the information where it needs to go so that we can then assess the impact of that. And I really liked that idea of front loading rather than let's jump to the assessment end when you've never been taught how to do it, funded to do it, rewarded for it. So for me, that was a really interesting thing. And what's come full circle with that now is that we see people talking at conferences and on blogs and things about, oh, we need to work out how to create impact. Or we talk to people in, say, the UK who will be talking about assessing impact, and they're talking about strategies for how to make more impact. And it's like, why don't you look to this literature, to these examples of what's been happening? Just they call it something different. They don't call it a pathway to impact. They call it knowledge mobilization or knowledge translation. And I see the wheel being recreated time and time again.
Yeah, totally. It's funny how you can have those blinkers if you only use the one language, and yet when we're doing our literature searches, we really do kind of think, how might somebody else have described what I'm describing by this 3-word term or whatever it is.
Yeah, yeah.
And we systematically design those searches where, maybe when we're doing our CPD, for instance, we forget that rigor. Is that?
Yeah, well, I think there's over 90 terms used to describe
Mm,
this, right?
mm.
They don't all mean the same thing, but they get interchangeably used. So I think, there's a lot we need to think about. And how do we find that? No one's done a dictionary like that.
Yeah, I think one of the symptoms is because of the research excellence framework and how big it is. It affects 140 institutions across the UK. It gets talked about in the research assessment world quite strongly. It gets copied. The research assessment exercise in Hong Kong is almost like a cut and paste, isn't it? Um,
Yeah, absolutely.
of that exercise. In fact, I gave some advice to some colleagues in one of the universities in Hong Kong, and they said, make sure you've read our guidance. And I read it, and I thought, I think I've read all of that somewhere else.
Well, why recreate the wheel, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So coming back to you, rather than wittering on about the research excellence framework, um, yeah, we were talking in the introduction about the Research Impact Summit. So I want to take you right back to where the idea popped into your head, because I know you're an ideas person. Was it a sunny day in Melbourne with a coffee somewhere, and you just go, "Oh, do you know what? I'll."
You want to know something funny? It was a
Go
sunny day in Melbourne, and I was walking from the coffee shop with a coffee in hand. So you're right on the money there. There you go. So look, the truth of it is, I kind of stole it. Um, well, not really stole it. Let's say innovated. Uh, I was starting my business. I was a couple of years in. I was listening to events online, and there was a guy who I think was in Singapore, an Australian, but sitting in Singapore, who was running all these free online events on all sorts of different things. And he was calling them these summits. And so there was the LinkedIn summit, the what was it, the email marketing summit, the all these business things. And all I thought was, what a great structure. Imagine if we did this for research impact. And then I started thinking, well, imagine if and also I think, in line with that, it was really around what if we could get all the best people in impact in the one room in a conference scenario and hear from them and learn from them? And what if we could do it without cost and without a time issue? Because we want to overcome the two challenges that everyone always has. Everyone will tell you, I don't have time and I don't have money. So let's get rid of that. So let's do it online because that's what this guy was doing. And I was like, okay, what would it look like? And if I'm brutally honest, the first one was literally a cookie cutter version of what he was doing, but for our sector. And, you know, I figured it was working for him, it'd work for us. And, it did. So that was quite amazing. I remember thinking, what if no one signs up? But 2,000 people or whatever it was in the first year. And yeah, it just so I innovated by borrowing from somewhere else. And I think there's nothing wrong with that. I think that's I say I stole it with tongue in cheek, but ultimately I think if you see a good idea that's working somewhere, you don't have to change everything. You can literally just try to do it in your area. You might have to tweak a few things, but I think we can do that pretty well. So it really stemmed from hearing that, from understanding that was a really great way to learn. But then also from a bit of a frustration for me, I was 2 years into my business. I was still having conversations with people saying, this isn't important, we don't care about this. And at this point, to give a bit of context, I was still operating under that banner of knowledge translation very much.
Mm,
And people kind of going, but that's not related to impact. And I was getting really frustrated by the fact that people didn't realize that you can't really have one without the other. So I thought, how can we educate as many people as possible? And again, that was the idea. This can be a global initiative to educate anyone who wants to listen, whether they're a researcher, a practitioner, a funder, a policymaker, whoever could tune into this. So for me, I guess that was the reason why, and it's where it came from.
Yeah, that's as I said, I think it was the first one I signed up for. I was like, "Ooh, this is." I was intrigued by the idea actually, and like, how is this going to work? And you do go, um, and then when you first asked me to, I was like, "Ooh," to be a guest on it because it's interesting. I wouldn't. I was as I was leading up to that, I was like, "What word am I going to choose?" And guest is right because it is an interview, just like we're doing now,
Yeah.
and there's been some fascinating things over the years. I can't say I've seen every single one because there's a huge amount of content over the 10 years, and which is still accessible, isn't it? People can still dive into that content. This 10th, you've asked people to kind of reflect on um, what's changed since they were last a guest on the summit. So, what have been your highlights over the last 10 years of doing them? Can you pick that?
Oh, well, I think for me, there's been many speakers that have been a highlight. I think the most thing that's come out of it for me has been the generosity of the sector. So as I said, the first one, I had an idea, but then it was like, oh, who do I get to interview? Who do I get to speak? And it's a little bit like you with how you said you're getting an opportunity to interview your impact heroes, and that's what it was like for me. It was like, great, who do I know that I would love to have these conversations with, and that I know would say yes. And in that first year, we had amazing people like Melanie Barwick and David Phipps and Peter Levesque from Canada. Simon Kerridge was on the first year. Stephen Hill, Mark Reed was also on that first year. And so I called in a few favors with people and said, "Hey, I got a crazy idea. Can I interview you?" And then across the 10 years, there's also been some really big hitters. Ged Hall was right in there. Um, but we've also had people from a tech company. So someone from Evernote was interviewed, and I was, they said yes, it was amazing. I had the chief scientist of Queensland at the time, Jeff Garrett, who's a great mentor of mine, David Sweeney when he was the executive chair of Research England, Stephen Hannay, who published the original Payback Framework, and that was a incredible conversation. I think we laughed the whole time, so that was kind of comedy. Um, and then on top of that, I think the thing that's been really interesting has been the ability to get sponsorship now for the summit, which who would have known? Somebody planted a seed, and so I thought, oh, let's give it a go. And so we've had support from you and Addie, both as a speaker originally, and now Overton, his company's sponsored it several times. So that's been really lovely. We've also had sponsorship from Sage Publishing and from BMJ and others. So it's been a really nice thing to have that. There's been lots of other sponsors as well over the years. I just can't remember them all off the top of my head, but we have just been really fortunate. And sometimes I've even reached out to professional speakers who charge for their time and had them come and speak and do it for nothing. I guess the thing I'm seeing right now, though, is that generosity starting to wane a little bit. I don't know if it's a sector thing, but we're getting more and more people say, "Are you going to pay me to do it?"
Right, that's interesting. I was going to ask you that follow up of what next. So is that putting the summit at risk, or um, can we keep people happy and go, it's still going to carry on?
Um, it's a it's something that's we're thinking about right at the moment because we've done 10 years and it is a lot of work for the team. It's crazy now when I think about it. The first one was me, my computer, in my study, at home, doing everything, building all the background, the systems, the membership site, I don't know how I did it, but it was days and nights. And now I have a team of people, a small team, that help me do it. So I don't know how I did it that first time, to be honest. But I know it takes a lot of effort from us, and it is a passion project, I'm going to say. It's we don't make money from it, but I look at it as my professional development. I get to talk to people, I get to learn from them, much like you said with the
Yeah.
podcast. Um, so what we're looking at the moment is, should we do this every year? Should we do it every other year? We are seeing numbers drop for attendance, but I will say I have a bit of a mantra around that it doesn't really matter how many people you get as long as the people you get learn and are engaged. So it's more about quality rather than quantity. And I think that's a mantra we can go with in impact generally. Um, but we've got a few other things going on. So maybe every 2 years, maybe every year. I'm not sure. Um, watch this space. January is my thinking time, so we will see whether it happens.
Yeah, yeah, it's lovely. It's lovely to think about that in the Southern Hemisphere when we've just done some webinars for the World Universities Network, and the team at One, the central team, said you got to think about not doing them in January for the Southern Hemisphere, and you kind of go, oh yeah, summer.
Yeah, everyone's just on holiday.
Yeah, absolutely. That's why cricket's currently happening down there, isn't it? Mm.
Yes, and I'm sorry that we're killing you guys.
Yeah, thanks for mentioning that. So, bringing it back to Australia, actually, just a bit more widely, what's your current analysis, I guess? What's the temperature check of culture around research impact in Australia?
Look, I think it's a really interesting question. We've got some incredible people working in impact in Australia. We've got people who are driving the sector here, doing the work that they do. Wade Kelly is one example. There are others that have just gone a blank. Sorry to the others in Australia. But look, there's heaps of people in Australia doing incredible things in impact space. That said, I think as a sector, our culture is up and down. For example, we are seeing impact creep into our grants, and the fact that people have to write impact case studies in their funding applications means that we've seen a culture shift around, I need to understand and do better with impact in the medical sector because that's where that's landed. So I believe that's changing culture, but more because it's pushed into having change. And that's exactly the same as REF. It changes culture because essentially people have to do it. There is a return on investment, so to speak. I feel like more broadly, though, our government is not really there in terms of what they want to do. We don't have those drivers, so you're not likely to get a job here. As a research impact manager or officer, you may have some of that in your job, but your job would be much broader than just impact. You'd have a very mixed role. What I think, though, is that, you know, um, the culture piece is tricky without the driver. I honestly think you have to have the drivers first. While we're still rewarding people for just doing a publication, we're not going to have that culture change. I don't think there's any researcher that doesn't genuinely want to make a difference, but given all of the time constraints and the other competing factors, they're going to do the things they have to do and that they do get rewarded for. So I don't think it's an issue with that. Um, yeah, I wish that we had a clear picture on what might happen and where it's going. I think if we were to think about what the possibility is. So, for example, our government are exploring some options around it, so maybe that will change some things. However, they are concerned about burden.
Mhm.
They're concerned about you know the workload on the workforce, and because of that, I think they're trying to take an easy journey. So they're trying to come up with shiny dashboards and very metric-based assessments. They're trying to come up with data collection systems that are going to track things, but I think that will oversimplify it, if I'm honest.
Mhm.
I don't think impact's that simple. I think it's
Mhm.
really complex. I think it's different every single time you look at it. Um, so if I had to think about what they might do to change the culture, I think that we would need to have a serious assessment. If we're going to do it, I always say, if you're going to do it properly.
Mm.
If you're, if you're going to do it in a half, sort of way, then don't do it at all because you are just wasting time and resources. Um, yeah. So I think our culture needs to be driven from external factors rather than the few of us in Australia that are trying to drive it from that other side, which makes it really hard for us.
Yeah, yeah, that's interesting. Obviously, the drivers need to be there, and the coalition of the willing as well. So I'd agree on both of those points, and when you only have the coalition of the willing, if there's no promotion of the people in that coalition, and I don't mean formal promotion. I mean they're just, yes, this is the right thing to do. That seems to be coming from other strong voices. Then it's very easy to be crowded out from with the other demands on the system, and it is a massive conflicting and competing set of demands that all higher education systems face across the world at the moment.
Yeah, I don't know what the answer is. I think other countries are perhaps more progressive. Sometimes I feel like in Australia we're very risk averse. We want to do things the easy way. It takes us a long time to kind of catch up. I mean, the Research Excellence Framework was an Australian thing that you guys took because we decided not to do it. So some people say, yep, great, they took it. We don't have to do it. Other people might be thinking it would be useful. Look, I think there's a couple of reasons that we do need to have something here. One of those reasons is that I think that um, and I don't just say this because I run a business in this, but I do think that if we did an assessment, we would overcome our funding crisis. So at the moment in Australia, we have an issue around percentage success rates in grants, as an example, because there's not a lot of funding in the system. So a recent grant example was an 8% success rate. Now, 8% is pretty low when you think about the amount of work that goes into creating these and writing these proposals. So, in my opinion, this is just my opinion, I think that if we're able to better showcase the return on investment from the money put in, we then have an argument for putting more money into that system. We can lobby for it. It's like if you have a non-profit organisation that survives on donors. Well, the donors aren't going to put in unless you're making a difference. So you have to, those organisations are constantly reporting on what they've done with the money, the benefits they've created. In research, I don't think we do that very well. We don't ever tell anyone what we did with the money. We don't report on how we spent public dollars. We're spending taxpayers' money. We owe them a, some kind of feedback on why they should keep investing in us.
Yeah, we're not doing a great job of demonstrating our worth. Um, Now, in the UK, ref has definitely helped with that, from my opinion. The inclusion of impact in ref was something that prevented a huge cut to the science budget, as we call it. The science budget funds research in all disciplines in the UK. Um, and that actually is, if you want the source of that, that's the actual minister that was responsible for ref at the time, David Willett. So there's an interview from him on the Institute for Government where it actually says that. And actually, post the first ref, there were funding pots that had never been available to researchers suddenly opening up in the UK, and you just go, oh, I wonder where, in terms of the back channels where that's been negotiated, what was used as part of the
Mm.
argument, so I think we've got to look at those things like assessment and go, when are they useful for us?
Yeah,
And when do they
yeah.
when do they make our arguments? But I think we should probably move on because I know it's getting late into your evening as my morning kind of winds up. Now, you've mentioned a number of times people and tribes, and You're back in Australia now after being here in the UK for the first Research Impact Ignite conference, which was in Southampton, and a lot of us from Leeds attended, and a lot of people attended from all over the place. Actually, lots of colleagues from Europe, colleagues from Canada. So, I'm going to get you to take us back to that Research Impact Academy Ideas Day, where you kind of came up with the idea, and tell us a bit more about your reflections on it. Just kind of, it's a couple of weeks since the conference happened. You've started getting some feedback. What are your
Yeah.
reflections on it?
Yeah, well, my first big reflection is, phew, pulled that off. I don't know how. But I guess to take you back to the ideas, the team day where it kind of became an idea, um, it was on that day, there were three of us around the table, so a small group of my team. And we don't often get together in person because we live all over. But two of us were essentially big ideas people, lots of ideas. That's just how we think. And the other is somebody who gets quite excitable and basically makes things happen. And that's a dangerous combination. It's also an exciting combination because really, my team just said, what are we going to talk about? And I said, well, maybe we should talk about things we should stop doing. And we had a whole conversation about all the things I didn't want to do anymore because they were boring or just I'm tired of them or don't really like them. And that led to the question, well, what do you want to do? Which I don't know if I had been thinking about conferences at the time. Most likely I had been thinking, what conference can I go to that has enough impact content that I can get my money's worth? Because, sometimes you pay thousands of dollars and you go and there's four presentations on impact over 2 days. And you're like, okay, well, or there's six and they're all on at the same time. Um, I don't know who makes these programs up, but anyway. So I started to think about how it would be really cool to run a conference that was just on impact. And they sort of said, well, you do the summit. And I said, no, no, no. I want to do a conference in person that's not just me interviewing people. I want to do a conference in person and I want it to be for people who do this stuff so I can learn from them. So kind of, again, it was a bit of a ploy to get people in the room that I could learn from. So if you want to hear all the presentations, what could you do? So I sort of said, oh, maybe we should run an in-person conference. And they sort of said, okay, well, that sounds like an interesting idea. And then I said, because I'm crazy, maybe we should do it in the UK. And I don't know where that came from, but essentially I went, if we're going to have people come to this thing, it has to be in the UK because there's more of an audience, of course. There's more of a profession, and there's numbers. So essentially that was what happened. And within, an hour, we had a website, we had a name, we had a blurb, we had a logo. I don't know what happened, but the train left the station pretty fast. Then we kind of went home. I started thinking about it and going, am I mad to do this? Where am I going to run it? Oh my gosh, what if no one registers? What if no one wants to come? It's going to cost me money to put this on. There was so many things around that. Um, I'm glad it worked. I loved it. I loved every minute of it. It was exactly what I wanted it to be. It was a group of people coming together, networking, discussing, enjoying time in person together. I got to meet people in person that I hadn't met in person before, like Julie Bailey, which was quite amazing. We've met many times online, but never in person. So that was super exciting for me. And it was great to see how connected the sector was, and even the new people coming in were like, people here are amazing. So I really liked that. And so my reflections on the back of that are both, thank God it worked. And secondly, just the fact that I think from the reaction, from watching people interact there, I believe that what we did was what I wanted it to do. We're obviously still getting some feedback. Personally, I'd love to do it again. I don't know when. I also worry because the first time you can do something that's unique,
Mm.
then anything subsequent to that might not be as good. It might be, well, kind of been there, done that. How do you keep evolving something, innovating on top of it, making it better? Um, I don't like to just do the same old, same old. I like
Mm.
to improve things and change things. And that's also an issue because it takes a lot of work. Um, so I think, on the back of that, yeah, I'm quietly, and I quietly am patting myself a little bit on the back, I'm just going to say, um, as much as that sounds really horrible, but also I just keep thinking about how my team in the background just really pulled this together. And when I talk about that, I have a very small team, but really there were three people that pulled this together. And that's a very small number of people to pull a conference together.
Yes, it is. It is absolutely. So just a couple of things I wanted to kind of pick out on. So you know, going back to a really early episode I did, probably 2023 time. I kind of did one around what's the future of research impact culture. And one of the comments that came up, because I tried to kind of crowdsource contributions to that episode with me just kind of synthesizing them. And one of the contributions came in and said, it, I interpret it as, okay, I'm a member of maybe ARMA, the Research Management Association in the UK, or the equivalent ARMS, is it in
Yeah, yeah,
Australia and New Zealand? But actually, I don't feel like I kind of naturally fit.
yeah,
I'm a subset of that group, but actually my overlap is not as great as I'd like it to be in a professional body. And I asked that question, kind of like at the end of the episode, do people want a professional body for impact, or not quite like surgeons, for instance, but licensed to practice and all of that, but something along those lines, a professional body for impact. And that's one of the issues with podcasts. I still don't know if anybody answered that yes or anybody answered that question no, but it sounds like you would maybe go for a yes. What would be your answer?
yeah. Look, I think I would say yes. I think those professional associations are great. I feel like they take a lot of work. But that said, this is a sector who really wants to do this. So I definitely think it would be something quite powerful to have that. It would take some thinking. I don't think we would want to structure something like that the way that perhaps some of the other research associations are structured, because I think it's a lot of work. But I think, yeah, definitely, I can see global chapters perhaps of an organization. I can see online meetings. The problem we have is time,
Mm,
because time zones are an issue. We have issues of people being busy as it is. Um, and that's why I think a lot of those professional associations end up with paid staff doing a lot of that work. So
yeah.
then you've got to make money.
Mm,
Yeah, it can be a really interesting one. But I think, I'd definitely be something I'd be interested
mhm,
in being a part of,
mm.
but I don't know how it might look or work.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, it's one of those ideas you look at and go, "Ooh, it's hard to kind of make it a reality." The other thing I wanted to ask about is obviously you took it on yourself, and I think I'm sure it's coming through in the feedback, and it was definitely the feeling in the room was that the community was really grateful for you, kind of, you know, essentially picking up the stick on your own and running with it. Um, so how can we help? What would you what would you like from us to kind of help make it happen again?
Yeah, look, I think from my perspective, and I said this really early on to basically everyone I spoke to about this when I was kind of asking people's ideas, reaching out to the sector and going, am I mad? And a lot of people going, yes, but let's do it. Um, but ultimately, I'm hopeful that this perhaps becomes quite a community-driven event. I picked it up and said, let's try it out. But I would love for the community to say, come hold it at our university, or we know we can search out venues in our area, or because that's the hardest thing.
Mm,
I'm not on the ground there. I now have the structures around how the background can work, but I think the community needs to take some more ownership of this. I think um, help out with, what I'd love to see is maybe help out in that way. And, obviously, I know that if we did another one, people would happily volunteer to be part of the committee because we love this stuff.
mm,
And like you were on the committee for this one, and so I don't think there's any issue with people taking on some of those roles. I think it's more of that who could be on the ground doing some of that work because I was fortunate this time to have somebody I knew very closely at the venue who could be that for me. But if I move it anywhere else, I don't have that.
mm,
And so that's another risk is where do we run it? Do we move it? Would it cost more? There's
mm.
so many questions around that.
Yeah.
But I guess as a community, I think, that's what I'd love if someone put up their hand and said, hey, we have a conference venue near us that does great deals for our university. Let's have a look at that.
So if any listeners, that sparks an idea in your head, just get in touch with Tamika.
Yeah, in a while.
Yeah, don't hassle her too soon.
Yeah.
Okay, Tamika, I know it's getting late in Australia, and we need to wrap up. So the final question I always ask people on this series, Research Impact Heroes, because you're one of mine. It was lovely working with you on with Epigeum when they asked me, who should we get from somewhere else to, outside of the UK? You were the first name that came into my head, and we had a great time on that project. So
Yeah.
who are your research impact heroes and why? And I'd love you to try and land on someone, that one
Oh,
person.
well, I think
Ooh.
I'm going to disappoint you though, Jed. I'm just going to say, look, I think there's too many to mention. I've got so many mentors, so many connections. I think that every person that supports impact and works in this community, that's furthering the discipline, that's furthering the practice, I think every single one of them is a hero because it's not easy. We deal with people, we deal with personalities, we deal with timelines, we deal with funding, we deal with egos, we deal with guideline changes, and we deal with all those challenges. But I guess if you want me to answer a question, and I've been thinking about this because it is really hard, uh, I picked two, and they're not going to be what you expect.
That's good. I love
So,
surprises.
so my two impact heroes, and I'll tell you why. So my two impact heroes are Kathy Witherman and Kate Shook, and they are my team. And the reason is not because they're well known in the sector or not because they've published books or they've written papers and publications, and they don't necessarily have big international profiles in impact, but they are my heroes because they finish my sentences. They can read my mind. They step up for me when I'm not available. For example, over the last couple of years, I've had two major deaths in my family, and they've been able to pick up the work and continue it on. Um, they also have to tolerate me, so they definitely are my hero because I sort of turn up with these crazy ideas, and people take a breath and go, okay, what do you mean? Um, and so, look, I think they're my heroes because, like me, they're driven, they're passionate. No matter how hard it might be, they turn up, they want to help people to have impact. So I hope that's not too much of a cop out, but I do genuinely feel that if there were two people that I had to call out who are my heroes every day, that's them.
Brilliant. Yeah, it's you mentioned those bereavements, and you always remember the people who hold you at that time.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
exactly.
Yeah, so thank you for that. I obviously have met Kate. I've never met Kathy, but I've seen her name in LinkedIn posts. So it's lovely to hear about them. Um, and hear why. So that's really important. And maybe Kate, you might be getting an invitation at some point down the line, and I'll not be immediate. It might be a surprise in a year or two's time for
Exactly.
on the Research Impact Heroes list. So thank you for naming them, and thank you for giving me your time. In the evening and down in Australia. And is there anything you'd like to say to finish off, and certainly say bye to all our listeners?
Yeah, look, Jed, thank you so much. I love that you do this, and I think it's really valuable, these types of interviews to learn and hear from people. And I know I love listening to the podcast people that you've interviewed, and I'm incredibly privileged to be asked to be part of it. So thank you for that. And as always, talking to you, I've learnt as much from you as I hope that, through this conversation you've learnt from me. And I just really appreciate it. So thank you so much. And thank you to the listeners who get to listen to this. I hope that there's something there for everyone as well. And if they have a venue, in a year or two, just let me know.
Thanks a lot, Tamika, and thanks for listening, everyone.
Thanks for listening to the Research Culture Uncovered podcast. Please subscribe so you never miss out on our brand new episodes. And if you're enjoying the discussions, give us some love by dropping a 5-star rating and written review, as it helps other research culturists find us. And please share with a friend and show them how to subscribe. Thanks for listening, and here's to you and your research culture.